Bienvenidos a Pueblo Mexico. Que lástima that I will not be with you. I'm not going to do any more in Spanish. I don't know enough about the audience. But what we're doing here is something that my colleague, Dr. Spade, who's there in person, and my other colleague, Dr. Ndala, have talked a lot about, and that is how do we get Americans past our sociocentric, ethnocentric view of the world? Because as Tom Friedman told us, and I'll say more about him in a minute, the world truly is flat. We're getting a great deal of diversity as an inevitability. And I think we as educators and as scholars have a responsibility to tear down these very artificial and arbitrary walls. So I'll just give you a quick example of how diverse things can be. Dr. Spade can give you slightly more specifics, but Hagerstown is a small community in western Maryland, about an hour and 10 minutes from DC, an hour and 20 minutes from Baltimore. And yet, in the last class I taught for them, which was last fall, I had Nigerian students, I had students from Cameroon, I had students from Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and I must have had students from 6 or 7 of Central and South American republics. So that's wonderful. One of the other useful things is the technology. It's made it possible for us to interact with people from all over the world instantaneously. Cell phones, Skype, Adobe Connect, they're all very real. And we use them, so it's much, much harder for us to have stereotypes of people from other cultures. Classic example within the last year. Look at the role that the cell phone and the internet played in 2 parts of the Arab Spring. First being Egypt, and the most recent one being Libya. These are very, very important. So as I said, let's come back to Friedman for a minute. The other thing that he pointed out, besides the world is flat and we're constantly interacting with people from other areas, is the fact that it's a hot and crowded world as well as flat. So we must learn to collaborate together to increase the efficiency in how we use the ever-shrinking resources that we have. So the next thing we should talk about then is why, after 40 years of teaching it, am I more convinced than ever that Sociology 101 is an ideal platform to start getting students weaned away from an ethnocentric view, whatever culture they come from. Okay, we deal with every one of the social institutions, and that's what creates a human entity. We talk about the artifacts that are there. Some of those are tangible. The fact that you're looking at a CD of me is a tangible artifact. There are symbolic artifacts. I'm making this 2 days before 9/11. 9/11 has no meaning. ¿Qué pasó 9/11? There's no meaning if you're somewhere, only a peripheral meaning if you're not from the United States. It's a very emotional meaning in the United States. And so those are the kinds of things that we prepare people to understand. There are many things that are taken for granted in a culture. And we have the opportunity to create a common flat platform, or perhaps a common denominator, to understand that we as humans are more similar than we are different. And the exciting part of the world is the diversity, because it is so enjoyable. And it also creates, if you look at what we know today about people's careers, the students we educate today are likely to have anywhere from 7 to 10 careers before they retire. And they're very, very likely to work with an organization or a company that is not in the United States. They're equally likely to travel on a business context outside of the United States. So let's take a look for a minute at Dr. Bachman, the lady who triggered some of this. She was at Michigan State. She's now at Ohio State. And one of the things she tells us, and I couldn't agree more, is by studying how other cultures do things, it helps put the way we do things in better perspective. It helps us to understand why we do certain things in the way that we do them. And we don't, as it were, look at other people as strange or look at them as somewhat inferior. Let me give you 3 quick things, because my time is limited. First of all, we had a group of students at the Hagerstown campus who came in essentially from Russia. They had started in Turkey, they spent time in Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, and then came to Mother Russia. The first time they took a test in one of our developmental courses, they got out of their seats, came and clustered together around a table. It shocked, culture shock to the nth degree for the faculty member. Didn't realize that in Eastern Europe, that's quite common. Students work together. And so the teacher had to, thankfully it was a teacher that was sensitive to differences in culture, and she asked, well, what are you doing? They explained it, fine. She redid the way the test was delivered so she could get the same outcome, but allowed them to use a testing métier that they were comfortable with. Okay, another one, I've worked with many, many Korean students over my whole career. I've heard faculty say, you can't trust Koreans, they're shifty. They won't look you in the eye. Total misunderstanding of Korean culture. I wish we had in the United States a degree of respect that we get in other countries. And Korea is one of the highest respect for education. It would be considered to be the height of insult for a mere student to look a professor in the eyes. It's another one. Another one that was interesting, I had a colleague who was Korean, and his wife was American. We happened to be together in a restaurant. They had their 4-year-old daughter with them. And all that my colleague would do was have a spoon and chopsticks. And the daughter said, Daddy, I want a fork. The sticks don't work. And he said, no, daughter, sticks work fine. It's fingers that don't work. He was preparing her for another culture of which he wanted her to be comfortable since it was his culture. Another thing she points out is to remove the ugly American syndrome. The only way we do things is our way. I remember reading a biography of Winston Churchill, and he was in South Africa during the Boer War. And they were right in the middle of something, and he said, we're stopping. It's 3 o'clock. It's time to brew up tea. That's the encapsulation, the enculturation of the British people. I had friends in the Peace Corps, told me a story about rural Bolivia. They went in, they were so excited. They built a laundromat. They electrified the village, built a laundromat. Guess what? The tribal chieftain said, very lovely. We appreciate it. But they didn't use it. Why didn't they use it? They would still go back to the creek that ran outside the village and do the clothing by pounding it on rocks in the water. Well, that was not the only function of that creek. That was the gossip mill for the village. That's how you found out everything about the village. They didn't have telephones yet. And all that was, you went into the laundromat, you put your clothes in, you left. You felt isolated. So it took a little time for our PCVs, Peace Corps volunteers, to figure out how to deal with that. Just as an example, I spent my vacation in Upper Peninsula of Michigan, where my mother is from. And there's an old cliche, which is old will be new again, and it is. One of the things we've observed in certain communal cultures is how people continue to live in the same area. I was talking to the only 2 cousins I have left there. And it turns out that the one cousin lives in his aunt's house. The other cousin lives in the house in which she was born. The son of the first cousin bought his other aunt's house. So these houses have stayed in my family for approaching a century, which is found very common in the Mennonite and Amish communities, Mennonite here in Washington County, Maryland, Amish when I was working on the Michigan-Indiana border. So these things are all there for you to be aware of and to work with. Okay, let's talk about how do we make the sociology course the tool that it can be. And I'll share some very simple strategies. The first of which is feel free to use YouTube. YouTube is a wonderful tool. You can bring in lots of things from other cultures. Feel free if you have contacts. I have family in Belgium, in Brussels. I have family in Paris. I can bring them in on Skype anytime. It's a wonderful tool to really ask about, okay, this is how we view something. Now, my brother-in-law, Bob, my nephew, I forgot my nephew's name, we'll go on. My nephew, what's going on? How is it viewed in Brussels? Okay, the other thing, how about if you have students, as I did, and do now, how about letting them talk about culture? The most incredible experience I had several semesters ago, I had 4 Muslim students, and I could guarantee, looking across the classroom, nobody had ever read the Quran. I was blessed. My colleague, our director, Dr. Rosemary Gillette Karam, she and I and Dr. Robin Spade have been friends for years. When I was staying with her when she was a president in North Carolina, I found the Quran on the breakfast table. I had the students talk about the Quran to understand that it is not as, how shall we say, it is not as anti-Western as the Western press might have you think. And the final thing, if you have a colleague from another culture, I have colleagues all over Morgan from other cultures, and I've used them in the classroom. I had students at Hagerstown from other cultures, came in and talked about their cultures, a way to develop a little more of a first-hand understanding. Okay, I'm going to turn this back over to Dr. Spade. I'm with you in spirit, but have a wonderful experience, and I look forward to the details when Dr. Spade comes back to the United States.